Right, okay, so the final session today, we've got one of our trustees, Eleanor, is going to talk about her life with Aniridia in a session called My Baby Hasn't Opened Her Eyes Yet. Thank you.
Okay, good evening all.
Good evening.
I would first of all like to pay tribute to my fellow speakers. As somebody with Aniridia, there was something for me in each talk this afternoon, or today. I would like to start with Ngozi, who gave me 2 new words for my vocabulary, and that is permanent displacement. It reminded me of when I was a child and I would stand on a wall and I wouldn't realize that the wall was very narrow, so I took many's the tumble. I knew nothing about permanent displacement. Later on, I listened to Miriam with great interest. For me, apart from having Aniridia, glaucoma has followed me everywhere, secondary glaucoma. Miriam talked about the raised pressure, and this was something I found myself. I could tell when my pressure was very, very high. This despite the fact that the doctor in casualty at Moorfields every time would tell me, I cannot tell by headache, but I could. When they tested my pressure, they would find it was very, very high. They still didn't want to believe me. Listening to Clive was very interesting, and it reminded me again of Eleanor the child. I could be very angry, very frustrated. It looked like I was a very naughty child. Thankfully, my mother didn't think this, and my mother put it down to frustration due to visual impairment, which Clive made quite clear. Finally, coming to Simon, a man after my own heart, loving technology. Technology changed my life, and today I'm going to do my presentation. This is the first time I've used a PowerPoint presentation in giving a talk. I thought about this and I wondered how was I going to prepare. I've been a Braille reader since the age of 10, and I have the Braille program here. Simon talked about difference. This certainly leaves me standing out as different. I have Braille and I'm reading with my fingers. I can read, it makes me literate, but it shows difference. More recently, I decided to embrace technology, and I'm an avid iPhone user. I would like to pay tribute to Steve Jobs for inventing and introducing the inclusivity of voiceover. I had thought of using my headphones so that I would not disturb as I go through each slide. Because I cannot see each slide, I use a lot of memory. But I didn't want to let myself down. So I would like to actually, just for a few minutes anyway, demonstrate how the technology with the iPhone has helped me. Simon talked about icons on the iPhone. He talked about reversing colors for those with some vision, and of course voiceover speech. There are many icons on the face of my iPhone. I really haven't got a clue what the picture of each icon is, but color to me is very important. And I can immediately identify whether it's Skype, my email, WhatsApp, whatever I want to use. This is just one set of icons. I have about 6 pages of icons, and I can use that very, very quickly. As Simon also said, the contrast. Contrast is so important again to me. I cannot read the writing, but here again I have white text on a black background. The fact that I can't read it is immaterial to me, but it gives me a guide as to where I am. If I had the reverse, the normal type colours, I would not be able to see it at all. I would actually be totally lost. I'm just going to put up my speech a little so you can hear how I am going to give myself a prompt with the technology. I'm doing this particularly for this talk this afternoon. Maybe in another situation the voiceover would be intrusive, but as we are a group of visually impaired, I feel it's good for those who are not familiar with voiceover on the iPhone to hear how it can help.
1647.
Going back to James' introduction to myself, I was born a long time ago in the middle of the last century, 1952. So immediately my mother realized there was a problem. My baby can't open her eyes. Straight away she said this to the staff at the hospital. They tried to reassure her there was no problem and I was fine. Later that day they came and they said that unfortunately I was stone blind and that I would never be able to see. It was a very distressing time for her. They did at that time, back 1952, give her the name of some doctor, but she was totally distraught, lost it, or didn't want to follow up. My journey to date. Here we're talking, there's no one quite like you. Well, there was no one quite like me in my life with aniridia, and I was age 64 before I met another person with aniridia. That was through Aniridia Network. Again, I would pay tribute to my consultant at Moorfields Eye Hospital back at that time, Dr. Maria Papadopoulos, who in the clinic was very persuasive that I should seek out Aniridia Network. She even went to the extent to get me telephone contact detail. On the right here we have my name, Eleanor. This I am using as a demonstration to show colour played such an important part for me when I was a child and beginning to learn how to write my name. My mother really had no support. She really didn't know how she was going to proceed. So she decided she would make the letters of my name and the alphabet tactile. We used matchsticks, we used bottle tops, we used marbles. And here on the picture I have Eleanor in coloured buttons. Again, it was almost a precursor. My mother didn't know at the time, she knew nothing about Braille, but it was giving me something tactile to use. Right, so now, here we are. I said I was 1952, I was born. I have my parents here, and I'm in photograph with my parents, and on the bottom right we have my granny. She was an intelligent lady, a very nice lady, but I was born in the west of Ireland, and when my mother tried to approach the conversation of Eleanor with visual impairment, she said, cover her up. You know, we don't talk about that. That was my paternal mother. I don't hold that against her. That was the time. And that's how people's attitude was. At that time, I was living in the west of Ireland. Now, this is my siblings. So I was born with sporadic aniridia. I'm the youngest of 6 children. I did have a certain amount of isolation. I did feel different. We have a photograph here in the top left, myself with one of my brothers and my doll. My doll was my friend, very, very important to me. So all the siblings, my sister who was the eldest, my 4 brothers, had no visual impairment. At the age of 10, I actually my parents heard about a school for the blind in Dublin. This was 100 miles away from where I lived in the west of Ireland. It meant going to a boarding school. It was very traumatic for me as a child. I have a top modern photograph on the top left of the screen showing the area of St. Mary's. It looks fine now, but back in 1962 when I went to St. Mary's, at that time it was known as an asylum. We all tend to associate the word asylum with mental incapacity. Again, that was 1960s in Ireland. The word asylum really stayed there until maybe the mid-80s. We have a photograph here of me reading Braille. I learned Braille at the age of 10, and here I was 18 years of age. This was a very important time in my life because I was actually the first child to leave my boarding school in Ireland with a secondary level education. I had achieved O-levels back in 1971, and this was a great opening for me for a professional career. I was going to come from Dublin to London and train as a physiotherapist. There were lots of visually impaired physiotherapists in the UK, but this was an historic moment, basically, for me. Okay, so this is Eleanor on the road to success. My sister took this photograph. She was very proud of my achievements, and as I say, it was an historic moment. So here I have 2 photographs. In this first one, we will see on the left, for the first time, I'm wearing glasses. I did not have glasses throughout my school years in Ireland. It was never thought that glasses would help me. Here, I have tinted glasses, and it was great to find, A, I could see more, and B, that I had some protection from the strong light. I was at Bath University. I had been working for some years now as a physiotherapy, but I was very interested in ongoing education. And the Open University is my friend. I have studied at the Open University for years and years. In the younger Eleanor, I was healthy and enjoying studying for a BSc at the Open University. In the other photographs, some years have gone by, some 20 years, and basically I was just getting on with my life. There was the usual life events that hit anybody in their life. I had cancer, which I got over, but I did retire from my physiotherapy work. However, I wanted to continue with my Open University study, and we have a photograph of me when I had obtained my law degree, my LLB, at the Open University. So I have a lot of time for the Open University. The Open University provided accessible materials throughout all my studies over all the years. In the beginning it was clunky and it was audio cassette. But as the technology moved on, and by the time I was doing my law degree, we had the books for visually impaired, all electronic in PDF format. So that was a tremendous help. Now, I have always been severely visually impaired. I realise with aniridia there's a huge visual acuity spectrum. I was always at the lower end. During my time working as a physiotherapist, I used my cane. I found it hard when I was young. The younger Eleanor found it hard to accept visual impairment. As the years went by, I realised I needed more and more support. Once I'd retired, which I had to retire due to ill health, the cancer, but thankfully, although that prevented me from continuing in physiotherapy, it still did not prevent me from living a full life. I have 3 wonderful guide dogs over the past 22 years. At the top, Black Labrador Pedro, who served me very well until he was put to sleep, suffering from cancer. In the middle, we have my wonderful chocolate Labrador Neela, and she is now over 13 years old. At the bottom, we have Ava. Ava's been with me now for 2.5 years, and Ava was a sponsor, a puppy guide dog. So Ava was known to lots of the British public for her 2.5 years, and before that, when she came to me. She was known from about 7 weeks old. She was like one of the canine faces of guide dogs. I'm very pleased, therefore, to see that we have a guide dog stand here today, because guide dogs have so much to offer. And now, apart from offering the mobility of a guide dogs is now supporting visually impaired children a lot, and that is just fantastic. So now, really, I'm moving on now to the conferences, because I'm now going to focus on what Aniridia Network has meant to me. I first attended the Aniridia Network UK conference in 2016, as I said, thanks to my consultant at Moorfields Eye Hospital, Maria Papadopoulos. And so I do feel strongly I need to mention Maria's name again, because she helped to change my life in terms of aniridia. In the second photograph, it was the conference of 2017, and here I'm with one of our speakers from last year, Effie, who could not be here today. I had great encouragement having joined Aniridia Network. I am from Ireland, and I immediately began to think, how could I encourage Irish people with aniridia to get together? So I felt I would do some preparatory work, and I would hope to work towards this. I started off in February 2017 by attending the Rare Disease Day, February the 28th. This is now an annual day recognised, and it's very important, as with aniridia, that we have a voice in Rare Disease Day. And also where I attended another conference, which was the Patient Voice 3 months later in Ireland, again wanting to have an aniridia presence there. Then I finally worked towards having the get-together in Dublin, people with aniridia. For me, what was a problem, and which now continues to be a problem, is GDPR, especially since 25th of May last year. It's hard, it's only by word of mouth that we can get word out there and network. So really, I decided I would see what I could do, and I successfully brought together a group of 30 people, which was reasonable really for rare disease in Ireland, aniridia, and in such a small population. I was given access to premises by the National Council for the Blind of Ireland to hold the day's meeting, which was fantastic. So that was in April 2017, but then we move on to June the 21st, 2017, and our first ever Aniridia Day. That, to me, again, was most important, and I wanted to be involved and feel involved with Aniridia Day. So for that, I decided it was education, education, education. And I went around to ophthalmic departments and hospitals in Dublin, the most important ones, to introduce myself, to talk about Aniridia, and to give out some leaflets. So we'll move 1 year on to Aniridia Day again, 2018, and you will have heard James speak earlier about the webinar. I took part in the webinar in 2018 as well. Now, this is about a Need to Talk partnership. I was invited to become a member on a board which had European funding for counselling for visually impaired, obviously not specific Aniridia, but for people with visual impairment in Northern Ireland, which is quite rural, the west of Scotland, and also in the Irish Republic, what we call the border counties. These are the counties between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, but based in the Irish Republic. This is a very good project, and it is coming up on 2 years in September, but it's a 5-year project. And for any of you who know people in these areas, the west of Scotland or Northern Ireland, it is very good to inform them about this project, which is being run by the RNIB in partnership with Fighting Blindness in the Irish Republic. When the Need to Talk partnership was launched, it was first launched in Belfast in 2017, and we deliberately chose the 12th of October, World Sight Day. 1 year later, in 2018, we launched the Need to Talk in Dublin at Fighting Blindness, and again, the date of the 6th of October was chosen because that was International Retina Day. So having joined Aniridia Network back in 2016, I was very interested and wanted to feel that I would be an active member. As I said, I therefore brought together the group in Ireland in 2017. Then I heard about the wider European network, the 4th Aniridia European Conference in Paris. So I was anxious to go along and be part of that, just so that I could educate myself more as well as participating. Here I have a few photographs just taken at the conference. One of a young man with his guide dog, whom I met, a young man from Italy. And then we have the president of our European Aniridia group, Rosa Sanchez de Vega, and the vice president. And I also have a well-known friend to Aniridia Network here, a photograph of myself with Judy Daniels. So really, I started off by showing some old black and white photographs of Eleanor the child, Eleanor growing up in Ireland. I didn't have the technology. I was aged 10 years before it was decided it was time that I should receive some education. I really only felt I started my education at the age of 10 years when I began to learn Braille. It was a big sacrifice having to move away from home, because I only went home in the holidays. But I knew back then, even at 10 years of age myself, that it was the only way if I was to move forward in life. Then I spoke about the Aniridia conferences. Finally, I have some other interests as well, and so here I'm just showing I like to take part in other projects. we have a poster here where I'd been in the swimming pool doing some swimming and now advertising for Aging Better in Camden in London. Also, you can see here where I am getting on a bus in London, and hopefully we'll soon have the technology, but I'm having to inquire of the driver as it's a bus stop where there aren't any people, and I had to inquire as to what the number of the bus is. I'd like to feel that I can stand at the stop now and do this. I have subsequently discovered that there is now some technology and I can use an app on my phone. The difficulty is if there's more than one bus coming to the stop. Also, again, I feel I must pay some tribute to Guide Dogs UK, and I am a speaker for Guide Dogs UK, interestingly only for the last 15 months. But I very much enjoy going around to schools, talking to children, telling them about the work of guide dogs. But also, I end up talking about myself and how I live with visual impairment and the type of eye problem that I suffer.
Right, let's give Eleanor a round of applause. Thank you very much.